and welcome to Philosophy with Phil, with me, Phil Cohen. This is the second of two videos about Rosh Hashanah, and all being well, there'll be a separate video about Yom Kippur. In the first video, we looked at three meanings of the word shofar, how it can mean a ram's horn, the actual shofar itself, shifra, beauty, which is a relation to which talks about growth and future potential, and shafir, the fetal sac or the umbilical cord or the placenta, whichever meaning is relevant, which is very much a link to our past. So God, through the shofar, we coronate. This relates to the three themes of the Musaf Amida, the main prayer of Rosh Hashanah, as per the Gemara that we quoted last time round, where we're enjoined to relate three concepts before God on Rosh Hashanah. The first concept is Malchus, is God's kingship over the universe, and how God is the sole proprietor, if you like, or king over the universe. Secondly, Zichronos, how our relationship to God has a significance. We are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And finally, shofars, that are intentions for future growth and beauty through growth, and enhancing our relationship with God through that growth. So in this video, I'd like to talk about a concept of judgment. Rosh Hashanah is known as Yom Hadin, the Day of Judgment. And I wanted to look at what we mean by judgment and how we judge things, and particularly people are judged. We've just, as an aside, we've just had the Sedra of the Parsha, the weekly Torah portion of Shoftim, which dealt with not just judges, which was sort of one tier of society, but there were the priests as well, who served in the temple, and then finally at the top there was the king. And if we can, we'll come back to those three sort of tiers later on in this video. But first, let's look at what it is to judge. When we judge something or someone, we're assessing it against what we feel it ought to be. So, for example, we take a car in for an annual service or an MOT. The mechanic will look at it and we'll say, well, look, this is what we expect the car to be, this is what we would like it to do, this is what we wanted it to do when we first bought it. It needs some parts replacing, or these parts are wearing down, or whatever it is, and we assess it against what it ought to be, and we decide whether or not to fix or replace the spare parts, the parts that are faulty. So we're assessing something against a standard, but what is that standard? Well, there are three ways we can assess it. We can set a universal standard that applies to all things and all people. A third thing that's independent of the judge or the person or thing being judged. So yes, we could look back at the MOT, a great example, where the government has set minimum standards that all cars have to pass every year. We've just had the A-level and GCSE results, where students have to pass a minimum requirement to get a particular grade. We've had driving tests, and where again the government has set, the Department of Transport has set minimum standards that we all need to have before we can pass, or we can drive a car. So it's like a universal set standard, gold standard if you like. Number two, the second way we can assess something is against that thing or person's previous performance. You get this in athletics. Athletes know that if they keep beating their personal best, they will get better and better, faster and faster, and better able to get closer to beating the world record. They're not necessarily aiming for that world record, but they're aiming to do better than they did last time round. The third type of assessment is against someone else. Now, this can be a bit of a two-edged sword. We have a lot of unhappiness and depression in society. There was a recent survey looked at teenagers in the UK being particularly depressed, and one of the reasons cited was because of the celebrity culture. They feel that they're being assessed against celebrities, whether it be their body or the way they look, the way they feel, the way they should be, and this is terribly, terribly unfair. Because these many of the images we see are obviously edited before they're published, and a lot of the standards that are set by these people are arbitrary and very difficult to attain. But on the other hand, we do have positive role models in society, and particularly, yes, in Judaism, many other religions have role models as well. And needless to say, those are often our religious leaders, the ones we aspire to be like. So you have those three types of appraisal, of assessment. You have the universal standard, you have your own previous track record, and you can set yourself against somebody else. Let's look at each of those in Judaism, and how Judaism approaches those three. In terms of the universal standard, we have, in Judaism, we use that appraisal when it comes to our relationship with other people. There are set laws about what happens if we, criminal damage, for example. We can't have wishy-washy standards for that. We can't say, well, you've done damage to somebody's car, but you drove better than you did last time. It can't be relative to anything else. We need to set absolute standards for that. And so in our relationship with others, particularly in a legalistic sense, when we're judging someone, we need to set that gold standard. God as king sets universal laws. But we can't judge our relationship with God against universal laws, because that just wouldn't work. We're all different, and we're all struggling at different points. We've talked about free will and how that free will differs from person to person, and how our priorities can often be different from person to person. So, whilst on the one hand we can't have a relative relationship with each other, we need to set some minimum standards. We do need, but in our relationship with God, we do need to be constantly improving. So that's where the first two of those assessments come in. The universal standard, our relationship with others, and the relative progression, hopefully, as to how we're performing, is with our relationship with God. And we're constantly striving to do better and to come closer to God through that. And you can see how those two categories relate to the first two categories that we talked about: Malchus, God's kingship, and the personal growth. A king sets absolute laws that have to be obeyed, versus the personal growth. That's something that we hope will improve and blossom. When it comes to the third category of assessment that we mentioned earlier, comparing ourselves with someone else, the third way that we appraise ourselves is in terms of our personality traits. And we very much look to role models in terms of the way the kindness that they show, the humility, the respect they show for other people. And it's those traits that we can learn by reading up about the lives of great religious leaders and great saints and great rabbonim. In fact, we judge them very much by the way they behaved with other people. We can't, be rude to people and just say, well, I'm less rude to you than I was yesterday. We can't judge ourselves by our personal progression in terms of our character traits. And we can set minimum standards, but we can't really set absolute standards, because each of us wants to grow in that area. So that's why that area is a third category. In terms of the three relationships that we have with God, though, we can see how those three assessments fit in nicely. In the Torah literature, we have three relationships with God that are described. The first one is as a king versus a subject, or a master and a servant. Similar sort of thing, where the king sets the rules, which are, as I say, set in stone, set up there for all to follow and are universally applied. The second relationship we have with God is as a parent versus a child. And there, the parent's main concern is, or should be, with that child's personal growth. The third relationship we have that's described in literature with God is the bride and the groom, where God is our groom, is our groom, and we are the bride coming to the wedding. The main concern for a bride and groom is sensitivity and respect for each other, for a husband and wife. And it's when that respect breaks down that marriage starts to become problematic. So the main requirements for the king, who's got the universal laws, is that you obey those laws, and that you're consistent, and that you're dependable, and that if you're given an instruction, you follow it through. Very much like, as I say, the master-servant relationship. The main priority for a parent is that their child is growing and developing in a healthy, happy way, and that they're not negligent of their responsibilities. Yes, there'll be setbacks, but we hope those setbacks are temporary blips, and that generally the trajectory is in a positive direction. With a bride and groom, or a husband and wife, spouses, the focus is on the relationship and the sensitivity to each other and what each other are doing to enhance that relationship. There's almost like there's some lovely things written about how competitive husband and wives can be to who's doing the best to enhance the relationship, who's doing the most to help around the house, who's doing the most to make sure the other person is happy. I said earlier that Shoftim in the Parsha talked about three tiers of people, and we can see how those three relate to these three relationships. We've got God as the king, and it's the judges that are there to implement the law and to make sure that it's upheld. The parent and child relationship, where the parent is concerned with the growth of the individual, relates to the Kohanim, to the priests, who are there to help people grow in their Torah learning and their general interactions. The bride and the groom, it may seem strange to compare them to the third level, the king, but we say that a groom is Dom el Melech on his wedding. He is like a king. And this is because we want each other to set the standards for each other, the role models for each other, to say this is how I want, this is what I want as a spouse, and to help that grow and grow and grow. I hope you found that video interesting. Thank you for watching. And as I say, all being well, the next video will be taking those three concepts to the next level and talking about sins and forgiveness. Bye now. Have a good week.